Give her the worst room, my stepmother had laughed. The sound like the tinkle of breaking glass. The one in the attic. She prefers her books to people anyway. It will be a kindness. The words, spoken to our host just moments before, still echoed in the cavernous hallway of Blackwood Manor. They clung to me like the damp chill of the stone walls, another layer in the shroud of invisibility I had learned to wear. I was a ghost in my own life, a footnote in my family's story, and my stepmother, Lady Isolde, was the author of my insignificance. I stood there, a small, still figure in a plain gray traveling dress, while my stepsister Clara was fussed over, her radiant beauty the sun around which our small family satellite spun. Clara was all light and laughter, her hair the color of spun gold, her eyes a brilliant, untroubled blue. She was not cruel, not intentionally. She was simply oblivious, cushioned from the world's sharp edges by her beauty and our stepmother's fierce ambition. I was the sharp edge, the inconvenient truth of my father's first marriage. A plain, quiet girl with eyes the color of a winter sky and a mind that saw the world in lines, angles, and histories that no one else cared about. My father, a man who had retreated so far into himself that he was little more than a shadow, gave a weak, assenting nod to Isolde's decree. A quiet life was his only desire, and I was a disruption to that quiet. He loved me, I suppose, in the abstract way one loves a distant memory. But he would never raise his voice for me. He would never choose a battle for my sake. The path of least resistance always led away from me. So I followed the harried-looking maid up the grand staircase, past the lavish guest suites with their roaring fires and plush velvets. We went up another, narrower flight, and then another, the air growing colder, the carpets giving way to bare, creaking wood. The final door was small and set deep into the slanted roofline. The room beyond was little more than a closet, containing a narrow cot, a rickety washstand, and a single, grime-streaked window that looked out over a panorama of slate tiles and lead flashing. It was cold, the kind of deep, permeating cold that settles in your bones. The worst room. Isolde had gotten her wish. I did not weep. Tears were a currency I could not afford to spend. Instead, I ran a hand over the rough-hewn beam that cut across the low ceiling. Oak, I noted, probably from the original 17th-century structure. The newer additions to the manor were largely cosmetic, a Georgian facade plastered onto a Tudor heart. My secret solace, my one rebellion, was in my books. Not novels of romance and adventure, but dense tomes on architectural history. While others saw a house, I saw a story written in stone and timber, a language of buttresses and fenestration. In a world that refused to see me, I found comfort in seeing the hidden skeletons of buildings. This house party was the pinnacle of the season, a gathering of the most influential families in the county, all brought together by a distant cousin with more ambition than sense. For Isolde, it was the grand stage upon which she would secure a dazzling match for Clara. For me, it was meant to be an exercise in self-effacement, a week of melting into corners and becoming one with the wallpaper. I was a prop, the drab backdrop against which Clara's brilliance could shine all the more brightly. I was to be present but unseen, heard but unheard. That first evening, I did as I was expected. I found a seat in a forgotten corner of the grand drawing room, a book held open on my lap as a shield. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, the air thick with perfume and the scent of beeswax. Isolde was in her element, a magnificent predator gliding through the assembled throng, her jewels flashing. Clara, a perfect, beautiful lure at her side. I watched them, feeling as distant as if I were observing them through a telescope. This was their world, not mine. I was an interloper, an awkward sentence in a beautifully composed poem. Then he had arrived. The hum of the room did not just quiet, it changed pitch, tightening with a new, sharp tension. I looked up from my book, my practiced invisibility momentarily forgotten. Standing in the grand archway was Duke Alistair Vane, the Iron Duke, a man spoken of in whispers, a figure of immense wealth, power, and forbidding solitude. He was not handsome in the classical way of the young dandies who flocked around Clara. His face was all harsh lines and severe angles, as if carved from the same granite as his legendary estate, Stonefall. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, missed nothing. They swept the room with a cool, assessing gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of social artifice and see the raw ambition and anxiety beneath. He had been a recluse for years, ever since the tragic death of his younger brother. His appearance here was a shock, a major coup for our host, and Isolde's eyes lit with a speculative fire that was almost frightening. Here was the ultimate prize, a duke of unimaginable standing. She immediately began to maneuver, positioning Clara in his path, like a general deploying her most valuable cavalry. I shrank further into my corner, hoping the shadows would swallow me completely. A man like that would see my plainness, my nothingness, in an instant. His gaze passed over me without a flicker of interest, and I felt a strange, bitter mix of relief and self-loathing. Of course he wouldn't see me, no one ever did. Later, a footman clumsily spilled a tray of wine glasses near my chair. Shards of crystal skittered across the floor. Before I could even move, Isolde was there, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Elara, for heaven's sake, watch where you are sitting. You are always in the way." She made a great show of helping the mortified footman, her words painting me as the cause of the disturbance, a clumsy obstacle. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over me. I felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to my corner, their expressions a mixture of pity and mild contempt. And then I saw him. Across the room, Duke Vane was watching. He was not looking at Isolde or at the mess on the floor. His pale, unreadable eyes were fixed directly on me. There was no pity in his expression, no judgment. It was a look of pure, unnerving observation, as if he were committing the entire sordid little scene to memory. I dropped my gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs. To be seen by him, at this moment of all moments, felt like being flayed alive. The conversation eventually turned to the local estates. Our host was boasting about the planned renovations for Blackwood Manor. "We shall tear down the entire north wing," he announced grandly. "It's a frightful old relic, completely unstable." "But the buttressing," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. "It's a rare example of Palladian symmetry adapted for a Tudor frame. Tearing it down would be a loss." Silence. A thick, complete silence fell over the little group. Isolde's face was a mask of cold fury. I had spoken out of turn. I had drawn attention to myself. I had broken the cardinal rule. "What did you say?" The voice was low, precise, and it came from across the room. Duke Vane had moved and now stood not 10 feet away. Every head turned towards him and then, inexorably, back to me. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. "Nothing, Your Grace, a foolish thought." "It did not sound foolish," he said, his gaze unwavering. He took 2 steps closer, a predator closing in on its prey. The crowd parted for him as if by magic. "You mentioned Palladian symmetry. Explain." It was not a request, it was a command. I felt the blood drain from my face. All I could think of was Isolde's rage, the punishment that would surely follow. But the Duke's eyes held me fast. They were not unkind, they were interested. Genuinely interested. My voice was a thread. "The fenestration, the window placements in the north wing, they are not random. They create a perfect mathematical balance with the roofline, but it's disguised by the older Tudor stonework. It's an architectural illusion. Most people would miss it. To remove it would be to erase a piece of history, a very clever one." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression utterly unreadable. The air in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. Isolde looked as if she might spontaneously combust. Clara looked merely confused. "An architectural illusion," the Duke repeated softly, almost to himself. He glanced at our host. "You would be a fool to tear it down. The girl is right." He did not call me by my name. He did not need to. He had called me the girl, and in doing so, he had lifted me from the shadows and placed me directly in the center of the room. He then turned his back on the stunned company and spoke directly to me, and only to me, for the next 10 minutes, his low voice a barrier against the rest of the world. He asked about foundational structures, about the use of local stone, about the influence of Italian design on English country houses. He asked questions no one had ever asked me, questions that spoke to the very heart of my secret world. And I, forgetting my fear, forgetting Isolde, forgetting myself, answered him. It was less a conversation than a collision of two minds that spoke the same forgotten language. When he finally gave a curt nod and moved away, the silence he left behind was more profound than the one before. I was no longer invisible. I had been seen by the Iron Duke. And as I caught my stepmother's venomous glare from across the room, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had just traded one prison for another, far more dangerous one. The attic room suddenly seemed like a sanctuary. The following morning, I hid myself away. I did not go down for breakfast, feigning a headache I did not have. I could not face Isolde's wrath, nor the curious stares that I knew would follow me. My brief moment in the Duke's spotlight had felt less like a triumph and more like a terrifying exposure. Hope, I had learned long ago, was a cruel and treacherous emotion. It was a flicker of warmth that only made the ensuing cold feel more bitter. I told myself it was a whim, a passing intellectual curiosity on his part. He was a man of deep learning, and he had found a momentary diversion in an unlikely source. It meant nothing. He would forget me by luncheon. I repeated this to myself like a prayer, huddled on my narrow cot, the cold of the attic seeping into my dress. My self-imposed exile was interrupted by a sharp rap on the door. It was Clara, her face a mixture of excitement and confusion. "Elara, you will never guess. A footman from Stonefall has just arrived, with a note for you." My heart stopped. It was impossible. For me. She thrust a heavy piece of cream-colored parchment into my hands. It was sealed with a black wax signet bearing the Vane crest, a stark, unadorned falcon. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The handwriting within was as severe and precise as the man himself. "Miss Elara Ainsworth, your observations last evening were insightful. My library at Stonefall contains a number of first editions on Palladian theory which may be of interest to you. I would be pleased if you would join me this afternoon to view them. Vane." It was stark, formal, and utterly confounding. It was also a direct command from a duke. Isolde, for all her fury, could not possibly refuse it without causing a significant social scandal. She was trapped by the very conventions she worshipped. When I descended the stairs, I found her in the morning room, her face tight with suppressed rage. "It is a matter of academic interest, of course," she said, her voice dangerously sweet. "The Duke is known for his eccentricities. Do try not to bore him, Elara. And for heaven's sake, wear something presentable. The blue muslin. It is the least offensive thing you own." The blue muslin was plain, but it was a decent fabric. It was a dress meant to make me fade away, but as I put it on, I felt a strange, terrifying flutter in my chest. I was going to Stonefall. I was going to his home. I tried to crush the feeling, to remind myself of the cold attic, of Isolde's sneer, of a lifetime of being second best. This was a fluke, a mistake. And yet, the hope I had tried so hard to extinguish flickered again, a tiny, stubborn flame in the darkness. The carriage ride to Stonefall was short, but it felt like a journey to another world. The estate was not beautiful in the picturesque way of Blackwood Manor. It was magnificent, almost brutalist in its grandeur. The house rose from the rugged landscape like a natural formation of granite, its lines clean, its form imposing. It was a fortress, a statement of unassailable power and permanence. It was a house that suited its master perfectly. I was met at the door by a housekeeper who seemed as ancient and formidable as the house itself. She was tall and thin, dressed in starched black silk, her white hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her face taut. "Miss Ainsworth," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "I am Mrs. Gable. His Grace is expecting you in the library." She led me through halls of polished stone and dark wood. There were no frivolous decorations, no clutter of society. There were only vast, stark portraits of vain ancestors, their severe faces following me as I passed. It was a house built for silence and contemplation, not for laughter and parties. The library was breathtaking. It was a two-story cathedral of books, shelves stretching up into the shadows, a spiral staircase of wrought iron ascending to a galleried upper level. A fire crackled in a fireplace large enough to stand in, and by the fire, Duke Vane was waiting. He was not dressed in the formal attire of the previous evening. He wore simple, dark trousers and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled to his forearms. It made him seem younger, more approachable, and yet somehow more dangerous. "Miss Ainsworth," he said, his voice the same low, precise rumble. "Thank you for coming." "Your Grace," I managed, my voice a whisper, "your home is remarkable." "It is a building," he said simply, "stone and wood. You are one of the few people I have met who I suspect would understand that." He gestured to a comfortable leather chair near the fire. "Please." I sat, perched on the edge of the cushion. Mrs. Gable appeared as if from nowhere, placing a tray with a steaming teapot and a single, delicate china cup beside me. For me, a small, thoughtful detail that struck me more than any grand gesture could have. "I will confess, Miss Ainsworth," the Duke began, taking the seat opposite me. "My invitation was not entirely academic." My heart sank. Here it came, the dismissal, the explanation that it was all a mistake. "I was intrigued," he continued, his pale eyes fixed on my face. "You were in a room full of people trying desperately to be seen, yet you had made yourself all but invisible. And in your invisibility, you saw something that none of them saw. You see things as they truly are, not as they are meant to appear. That is a rare quality." I did not know what to say. I had spent my entire life being told my quietness was a flaw, my introspection a sign of melancholy. He was describing it as a strength. He leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more somber. My younger brother, Thomas, was an aspiring architect. He died 5 years ago. He had the same clarity of vision. He saw the world in lines and forms. He believed a building was a testament to truth. The world of society, of parties and empty flattery, felt like a lie to him. After he was gone, it began to feel that way to me too. The confession hung in the air between us, a shocking, intimate revelation. This was the source of his reclusiveness, the private grief that had turned him into the Iron Duke. He was not sharing it out of pity, I realized. He was sharing it as an explanation. He was telling me why he had seen me. He had recognized a fellow soul, one who spoke his brother's lost language. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Your Grace," I said, my voice soft but steady. "He would have liked you," he said, and the words were simple, direct, and devastating. He stood then, his brief moment of vulnerability passing. "But I did promise you books." For the next hour, he showed me his collection. He pulled down heavy, leather-bound volumes, spreading their delicate pages on the massive library table. He did not lecture or condescend. He asked my opinion. He listened to my theories. He treated me as an intellectual equal. It was intoxicating, more potent than any wine. As the afternoon light began to fade, he walked me back to the entrance hall. "This one," he said, pressing a slim, elegant volume into my hands. It was Andrea Palladio's I Quattro Libri dell'Architettura, a priceless first edition. "I would be interested to hear your thoughts on it. You may borrow it." I stared at him, speechless. To entrust such a treasure to me, a girl he barely knew, was an act of profound faith. It was a gesture that said, more clearly than any words, "I trust you. I see your worth." As I rode back to Blackwood Manor, the book held tightly in my lap like a holy relic, I could no longer deny the hope that was blooming, fierce and terrifying in my chest. The Duke had not just given me a book, he had given me a glimpse of a world where I was not invisible, where my mind was not a burden but a gift. He had given me a small, solid piece of my own value. And I knew, with a dawning sense of both terror and elation, that my life was about to change forever. I also knew that Isolde would not let this happen without a fight. The quiet war for my future had just begun. The days that followed took on a surreal quality. The Duke's interest did not wane. It became a quiet, steady fact of our existence at Blackwood. He would appear at the manor, his presence always a disruption, and under the thinnest of pretexts, he would seek me out. He arranged for Clara to tour the gardens at Stonefall, insisting I accompany her as a chaperone, a clever inversion of social norms that left Isolde fuming but powerless. While Clara wandered among the rose bushes, bored and beautiful, Alistair, for he had insisted I call him Alistair in private, would lead me to a secluded stone bench overlooking the rugged valley, and we would talk. Our conversations were the foundation of something I had never dared to imagine. We spoke of the geometric purity of a Doric column, the spiritual aspiration of a Gothic arch, the honesty of an exposed beam. But beneath the surface of these academic discussions, we were speaking of other things, of truth, of integrity, of finding a place to belong. We were building a structure between us, not of stone and wood, but of shared thoughts and mutual understanding. He saw the architecture of my mind, and I, in turn, was beginning to see the man behind the fortress of the Iron Duke. One afternoon, he took me to a part of the estate I had not seen before. It was a half-finished folly on a windswept hill, a delicate structure of white marble that seemed both ancient and new. Piles of cut stone lay nearby, and architectural plans, weighted down against the wind, were spread on a trestle table. "This was Thomas's last project," Alistair said, his voice low. He traced a line on the drawing with his finger. He called it his chapel to the sky. He wanted a place that felt open to the world, not closed off from it. I looked from the elegant, unfinished building to his face. The severe line seemed to soften in the pale afternoon light, the guarded expression replaced by a profound, unguarded sorrow. For the first time, I saw not the powerful Duke, but a man haunted by grief. "He believed buildings had souls," Alistair continued, his gaze distant, "that they held the memories and intentions of those who built them. After he died, I closed myself off. Stonefall became my tomb as much as his. The world outside, all the noise, the posturing, the endless social maneuvering, it all felt so profoundly false, hollow." He turned to look at me then, and his pale gray eyes were startlingly raw. "Your voice, Miss Ainsworth, Alara, that first night. It was the first thing that has sounded true to me in 5 years." My heart ached for him. The great, unassailable Duke was confessing his vulnerability to me, the invisible girl. In that moment, the vast social chasm between us evaporated. I was not a plain girl talking to a Duke. I was a woman looking at a man in pain. Instinctively, I reached out and placed my hand on his arm. It was a simple, impulsive gesture, but it felt momentous. "He was right," I said softly. "Buildings do have souls, and they can be prisons, or they can be sanctuaries. It seems you have been living in a prison of your own making, Alistair." The use of his first name, spoken so naturally, hung in the air between us. He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back to my face. A muscle worked in his jaw. He did not pull away. Instead, he covered my hand with his own. His skin was warm, his touch firm and certain. It was not the fleeting, accidental brush of fingers over a book. This was a deliberate connection, a silent acknowledgement that a boundary had been crossed. "Perhaps," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I could not name. "But a prison is only a prison until someone shows you where the key is hidden." He held my gaze for a moment longer, and in the depths of his eyes, I saw something shift. The cool, analytical observer was gone, replaced by a raw, startling intensity. A near smile, a fleeting ghost of an expression, touched his lips, and it transformed his severe face completely. It was in that moment, on that windswept hill beside his brother's unfinished dream, that I allowed myself to fall. I tumbled headlong into the terrifying, impossible hope that this man, this brilliant, grieving, magnificent man, might actually care for me. The shift was not lost on Isolde. She was a creature of social nuance, a predator who could sense the slightest change in the currents of power. My quiet confidence, the light in my eyes that I could no longer hide, the way the Duke's gaze sought me out in a crowded room, these were signs she could not misinterpret. I was no longer a nuisance, I was a threat. A direct threat to her most cherished ambition, a ducal coronet for Clara. The idea that I, the plain, bookish afterthought, might attain the prize she had earmarked for her perfect daughter was an intolerable insult. Her campaign against me escalated from casual cruelty to calculated warfare. The first salvo was fired in private. She cornered me in the cold attic room, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "Do you truly believe you are so special, you foolish little girl? A duke does not marry a mouse. He is toying with you. An intellectual curiosity. You are his pet project, and when he tires of you, he will cast you aside, and you will be a laughingstock. You are ruining your own prospects, and more importantly, you are ruining Clara's." I stood my ground, my newfound courage a fragile shield. "What I discuss with His Grace is my own affair." Her eyes narrowed. "You have no affairs. You have a duty, and your duty is to be silent, to be invisible, and to not interfere. I am warning you, Alara, end this, before I am forced to end it for you." I did not end it. How could I? The connection with Alistair was the most real thing in my life. It was heir to my suffocating existence. So Isolde moved to her next, more desperate stratagem. A letter arrived at Stonefall. I learned of it later, but I can picture it now. Her elegant looping script on perfumed paper, every word a carefully crafted piece of poison. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, designed to prey on the fears of a man of his class and position. She painted me as a cunning, desperate social climber. She wrote that I had feigned my interest in architecture, having cleverly researched his late brother's passion, all in a pathetic attempt to ensnare him. She twisted my quiet nature into a sign of a melancholy and unstable mind, a dangerous inheritance from my mother, who had died young. She hinted at fits of hysteria, of a morose and manipulative personality hidden beneath a quiet exterior. The final, most vicious stroke was the invention of a prior attachment. She informed the Duke that I was, in fact, all but promised to a Mr. Abernathy, a respectable but dull country squire, a match my father had approved. My flirtation with the Duke, she claimed, was a flight of fancy, an act of rebellion that was causing my family great distress. She begged him, for my own good and for the sake of our family's honor, to cease all contact, to send me back to the quiet, stable life that was planned for me. She was attempting to blackmail him with social propriety and the specter of a madwoman. It was a declaration of total war. The day after the letter was sent, a dreadful silence descended. The Duke did not visit. No message arrived from Stonefall. Isolde was smug, triumphant. "You see," she said to me at dinner, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He has come to his senses. It is for the best, dear. A man like that needs a wife who is stable." Fear, cold and sickening, began to coil in my stomach. Had she succeeded? Had her venomous lies found their mark? Had Alistair, a man so wary of falsehood, believed her? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp blade twisting in my chest. My brief, brilliant summer of hope was turning into a bleak winter of despair. The world was fading to gray again. The walls of my prison, which had seemed to be dissolving, were now being rebuilt around me, thicker and more impenetrable than ever. I retreated to my attic room, the cold a familiar, miserable comfort. I had been a fool to hope. I had been a fool to believe I could ever be worthy of being truly seen. The worst room was where I belonged, after all. The silence from Stonefall stretched for 2 agonizing days. It was a void that consumed all my courage, leaving only the familiar ache of resignation. Isolde grew more confident with every passing hour, her triumph radiating from her like heat. She treated me with a cloying, victorious pity that was worse than her outright cruelty. My father, relieved that the unsettling business with the Duke was seemingly over, retreated further into his newspaper. Clara watched me with worried eyes, a dawning unease on her beautiful face, but she did not know how to breach the wall of my misery. I was alone, back in my box of invisibility, The brief, brilliant light extinguished. On the third day, another liveried footman from Stonefall arrived. My heart leaped with a wild, painful jolt, only to plummet when I saw the letters he carried. There was one for my father, one for Lady Isolde, and one for Clara. But there was none for me. Isolde took hers with a triumphant smirk. An apology, no doubt, she murmured, breaking the seal. Her face, however, did not hold the expression I expected. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then alarm. "What is it?" my father asked, looking up from his own identical note. "His Grace has invited us to Stonefall this afternoon," Isolde said, her voice tight. "All of us. To discuss a matter of family importance." She looked at me, a new, sharp suspicion in her eyes. "He specifically requests your presence, Ilara." The dread that washed over me was icy. This was not a reconciliation. This was a dismissal. He was going to end it formally, in front of my family, to appease Isolde and uphold propriety. He was going to put me back in my place, once and for all. The humiliation would be absolute. The carriage ride was silent and fraught with tension. I felt like a prisoner being led to her execution. Isolde sat opposite me, her face a hard, unreadable mask. She believed she was marching toward her final victory. I was marching toward my final defeat. We were shown not to a formal drawing room, but to the library. His library. Our sanctuary. The sight of it, the scent of old paper and wood smoke, was a fresh torment. Alistair was standing by the massive fireplace, his back to us, staring into the flames. When he turned, his face was like granite. The warmth I had come to know was gone, replaced by a chilling, formidable severity. This was the Iron Duke in his full, terrifying power. "Lady Isolde, Father," he said, his voice clipped, formally acknowledging my father's presence in a way that was almost an insult. "Clara, Ilara." He said my name last, his gaze sweeping over me for only an instant, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," Isolde began, her voice smooth as cream. "We were so pleased to receive your invitation. I trust you received my letter and understood the delicate nature of our family's concerns." "Oh, I understood it perfectly," Alistair said, his voice dangerously soft. He walked to the massive library table, where a single sheet of paper lay. Isolde's letter. "You wrote to me of Ilara's cunning scheme to ensnare me." He picked up the letter, holding it as if it were something distasteful. "You described her as manipulative. I, on the other hand, have found her to be the only person of my acquaintance utterly incapable of artifice." Isolde's smile faltered. "Your Grace, I assure you, as her stepmother. You also claimed she has a melancholy and unstable mind," he continued, his voice cutting through hers like a blade. "I have spent hours in conversation with her. I find her intellect to be sharper, her perceptions more acute, and her mind more beautifully structured than any I have ever had the privilege of encountering." A gasp escaped Clara. My father shifted uncomfortably. Isolde's face had gone pale. "And then," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "there is the matter of this Mr. Abernathy. The suitable match you claimed was all but arranged." He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before he moved to a small, locked chest on the table. He produced a key and opened it. He drew out not one, but a sheaf of papers. "My men are quite efficient, Lady Isolde. I had them look into Mr. Abernathy, a decent man. He has, however, been traveling on the continent for the past 6 months and has not corresponded with your family in over a year. More interestingly, my inquiries led me to your family's financial accounts." He laid another document on the table. It was covered in columns of figures. "This is the ledger for the inheritance left to Ilara by her mother. A modest but not insignificant sum intended for her dowry. I find it curious that, over the past 5 years, significant funds have been withdrawn. Funds that, by a remarkable coincidence, seem to match the cost of Clara's last 2 seasons in London, including her gowns, her jewels, and her presentation at court." The room was utterly silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Isolde stared at the ledger, her face crumbling. The mask was gone. All that was left was raw, ugly greed and panic. You have no right," she stammered. "I have every right when fraud is used to slander a person under my protection," he stated, his voice like ice. It was then that something inside me broke. Not in weakness, but in strength. The years of silence, of swallowing insults, of making myself small, they all fell away. I saw the proof of her treachery laid bare, but more than that, I saw him. He had not believed her. He had never believed her. He had trusted me. He had fought for me. Empowered by his unwavering faith, I found my voice. I took a step forward. All eyes turned to me. "You were right about one thing, Isolde," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing with a strength I never knew I possessed. "You gave me the worst room. You have always given me the worst room. In every house, in every gathering, in your heart. You pushed me into the attics and the corners, hoping I would fade into the walls. I looked at her, my gaze unflinching. But you made a mistake. While I was in those forgotten rooms, I was not looking at the faded wallpaper. I was looking at the structure. I was studying the foundations. I learned to see how things are built, and more importantly, how they fall apart. You built a life on lies, on cruelty, on stolen funds, and a house with a rotten foundation cannot stand. I turned to my father. And you let her do it. For a quiet life, you sacrificed your own daughter's happiness. You let her turn your house into a prison." My father flinched as if struck, his face ashen with a shame so profound, it was painful to watch. "Alara, I am sorry." Clara, her face streaked with tears, stepped away from her mother. "She's right," she whispered, looking at Isolde with horror. "All this time, you were so cruel. I never understood. How could you?" Isolde was broken. Utterly and completely. Her social ambition, her power, her entire world, all of it had been dismantled in this room by a few sheets of paper and the truth. She stared at Alistair, her expression a venomous cocktail of hatred and defeat. "You will regret this," she hissed. "No," Alistair said calmly, "you will." He gestured to the door. "Now, I believe this matter is concluded. Leave my house." They left, Isolde, defeated, my father, a broken man, and Clara, who cast one last, long, apologetic look at me before she followed them out. The heavy library door closed behind them, and the silence that fell was not empty, but filled with a profound and shuddering relief. Alistair and I were alone. The terrible tension of the last hour, of the last several days, finally broke. I felt a tremor run through my body, the aftermath of a battle I had not known I was strong enough to fight. I had spoken. I had stood up for myself. I had claimed my own story. Alistair came to stand before me. The severity was gone from his face, replaced by an expression of immense tenderness. He gently took my hands in his. They were still trembling. "Alara," he said, his voice low and resonant. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with tears I could no longer hold back. They were not tears of sorrow, but of catharsis, of vindication. I wept. He did not try to stop me. He simply stood there, his hands holding mine, a solid, unwavering presence until the storm passed. When my tears subsided, he lifted a hand and gently brushed a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. The touch was electric. "I have spent 5 years in a fortress of my own making, Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I built the walls high and the gates strong, and I let no one in. You are the only person who ever looked at it and saw the architecture, not just the stone. You saw the design, the purpose, the sorrow behind it." He took a deep breath, his pale eyes searching mine. "I am not offering you a sanctuary from your family. I am not rescuing you. You have just proven you are more than capable of rescuing yourself." His grip on my hands tightened. "What I am offering is a partnership. I do not wish to give you a room in my house, Alara Ainsworth. I wish to give you the entire house, all of it. Stonefall, its history, its future. I want you to be my partner in its halls, in its life, to fill its silences with your brilliant mind." My breath caught in my throat. My heart felt as if it might burst. "Marry me," he said. The words simple, direct, and more powerful than any poetic declaration. "Be my duchess, be my equal, be my wife." I could not speak. I could only nod, a wave of joy so profound it was dizzying washing over me. A slow, true smile spread across his face, the one I had only glimpsed on the hill, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a frantic, passionate explosion. It was deep and certain and unbelievably gentle. It was the end of a very long winter. It was the feeling of a locked door swinging open. It was the taste of being seen, of being valued, of being loved not in spite of who I was, but because of it. It was the feeling of coming home. 1 year later, the late afternoon sun streamed through the tall, arched windows of the Stonefall Library, illuminating floating dust motes like tiny golden nebulae. The scent of lemon oil from the polished wood and the dry, sweet perfume of old books was the scent of my life now, the scent of peace. I sat at the great table, a set of architectural plans spread before me, a charcoal pencil in my hand. Beside me, Alistair leaned over my shoulder, his arm brushing mine, his presence a warm, solid reality that still, after all this time, made my heart beat a little faster. We were working on the final designs for the restoration of his brother's folly, the chapel to the sky. We were not just completing it, we were reimagining it together, a fusion of Thomas's original vision and my own. It was to be a place of light and air, a testament not to loss, but to continuity. "If we adjust the pitch of the roofline here," I murmured, sketching a new line, "it will catch the morning light at the solstice. A line of pure gold, straight to the center of the floor." "An architectural illusion," Alistair said, his voice rumbling with quiet amusement. He bent his head and pressed a soft kiss to my temple. "My clever duchess." I smiled, leaning back against him. My duchess. The title had felt strange at first, a costume I was wearing. But it was not the title that defined me. Here, with him, I was simply Alara. I was the woman who loved the bones of buildings, who found poetry in mathematics, who had once believed herself to be invisible. My father had written to me, his letters filled with a clumsy, heartfelt remorse. He was a quieter man now, living a simpler life, the spell of Isolde broken. Clara, to my surprise, had become a friend. She visited often, her beauty no longer a barrier between us, but simply a fact of who she was. She was finding her own way, free from her mother's suffocating ambition. Isolde, I had heard, had retired to the country in disgrace, her social world in ashes. I felt no triumph in her defeat, only a distant, quiet pity for a woman who had never understood that a home is not built from power, but from love. I ran my hand over the smooth, heavy paper of the plans. I thought of that cold attic room at Blackwood Manor, a space designed to diminish me, to make me nothing. And I thought of this room, this house, this life, a space so vast it could have swallowed me, but instead it had become my home. Alistair had not given me a house. He had given me the freedom to be myself within it. He had seen me when I was hidden in the shadows, and he had not tried to pull me into his light, but had simply walked into the shadows to stand with me. He had seen my worth when I could not see it myself. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his gaze following mine. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I turned my head, my lips brushing his. "About foundations," I said, "and about how the smallest, most forgotten space can feel like a prison, and the grandest estate can feel like a sanctuary. It has nothing to do with the size of the rooms." I smiled, a real, deep smile that reached my eyes. "It has everything to do with the person you share them with,"